a queen, was accused of orchestrating her husband's brutal murder before marrying his cousin just months later. Another, a child bride of 12, was snatched from her fiancé by a king, an act that ignited wars and crumbled an empire. And one dowager queen's secret marriage to a handsome commoner, a man far beneath her station, unwittingly paved the way for one of history's most famous royal dynasties. Number 6. Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. Isabella I of Castile was not born to be the mighty queen she became. Her early life was marked by uncertainty and political maneuvering. Born in 1451, she was the daughter of John II of Castile and his second wife, Isabella of Portugal. Her much older half-brother, Henry IV, ascended to the Castilian throne when Isabella was just 3. Henry's reign was troubled, plagued by rebellious nobles and, crucially, a disputed succession. His own daughter, Joanna, was widely rumored to be illegitimate, nicknamed La Beltranea, after a nobleman at court, Beltran de la Cueva, who was alleged to be her real father. This uncertainty about Juana's parentage pushed Isabella and her younger brother Alfonso into the political spotlight as alternative heirs. The nobles of Castile were deeply divided. One faction supported Juana, while another championed young Alfonso. After Alfonso died suddenly in 1468, possibly from illness or even poison, the rebellious nobles turned their hopes to Isabella. She was only 17, but she was already demonstrating a steely resolve and a keen political mind. Henry IV, under immense pressure, was eventually forced to recognize Isabella as his heir presumptive in the Treaty of the Bulls of Gusando in 1468, but with a critical condition. Isabella was not to marry without his consent. This clause was designed to allow Henry to control her alliances and, by extension, the future of Castile. Henry proposed several suitors for Isabella, including King Alfonso V of Portugal, her much older widowed uncle, and Charles, Duke of Berry, the brother of King Louis XI of France. Isabella, however, had her own ideas. She was determined to choose a husband who would respect her rights as Queen Regnant of Castile and who would be a strong ally. Her preferred candidate was Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Aragon, a kingdom neighboring Castile on the Iberian Peninsula. A union between Castile and Aragon held the promise of creating a powerful, unified Spanish kingdom capable of completing the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to expel the Moorish rulers from Iberia and projecting power onto the European stage. Ferdinand was a year younger than Isabella, handsome and known for his political acumen and military skill. He, too, saw the immense advantages of a marriage alliance with Castile. The problem was King Henry IV. He was vehemently opposed to the Aragonese match, fearing it would make Isabella too powerful and independent. He favored the Portuguese alliance, which would subordinate Castilian interests to Portugal. Knowing Henry would never agree, Isabella and Ferdinand decided to take matters into their own hands. Their courtship was conducted largely in secret, through trusted intermediaries. The risks were enormous. If their plans were discovered, Isabella could be imprisoned or disinherited. Ferdinand would face political humiliation. Despite the dangers, they pressed ahead. In 1469, Ferdinand, disguised as a merchant servant to avoid detection by Henry's spies and hostile nobles, traveled secretly through Castile to meet Isabella in Valladolid. he reportedly had to borrow money to fund his clandestine journey. Their first meeting was said to be a success. They were apparently impressed with each other. They decided to marry immediately before Henry IV could intervene. However, another significant obstacle stood in their way: consanguinity. Isabella and Ferdinand were second cousins, sharing a common great-grandfather, John I of Castile. According to canon law, such a close blood relationship required a papal dispensation for the marriage to be considered valid by the Church. Pope Paul II, under pressure from various political factions including France, which opposed a strong united Spain, was reluctant to grant the dispensation quickly. Time was of the essence. To overcome this hurdle, Ferdinand and his supporters, including the Archbishop of Toledo, Alfonso de Acuna, resorted to a desperate and highly controversial measure. They produced a forged papal bull, Pius II, granting the necessary dispensation. With this fraudulent document in hand, Isabella and Ferdinand were married on October 19, 1469, in the Palacio de los Viveros in Valladolid. Isabella was 18, Ferdinand 17. The ceremony was relatively modest, given the circumstances, but its implications were monumental. When King Henry IV learned of Isabella's defiant marriage, he was enraged. He considered it a direct breach of the Treaty of the Bulls of Gasando, and declared Isabella stripped of her rights as heir, proclaiming his daughter Joanna la Beltraneja as the rightful successor to the Castilian throne once more. This act plunged Castile into a civil war upon Henry's death in 1474. The War of the Castilian Succession lasted for 5 years, with Isabella and Ferdinand supported by Aragon and a significant portion of the Castilian nobility battling against Joanna and her backers, who included King Alfonso V of Portugal, whom Joanna married to bolster her claim, and France. The controversy surrounding their marriage, its secrecy, Isabella's defiance of her king, and the use of a forged papal dispensation. A genuine one was only obtained later in 1471 from Pope Sixtus IV at Fort, who recognized the political reality and the strength of Isabella and Ferdinand's position cast a shadow over the early years of their joint rule. However, their partnership proved to be remarkably successful. They worked together famously, ruling under the motto Tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel come Fernando. They amount to the same Isabella as Ferdinand, signifying their equal authority, though in practice Ferdinand often deferred to Isabella in Castilian internal affairs. Their combined strength eventually led to victory in the Civil War, the unification of their kingdoms, though Castile and Aragon retained their distinct laws and institutions for centuries, the completion of the Reconquista with the conquest of Granada in 1492, the infamous Spanish Inquisition, and the funding of Christopher Columbus's voyage that same year, events that reshaped Spain and the world. The audacious and controversial marriage, born of defiance and deception, laid the foundation for the Spanish Golden Age. Number 5. Catherine of Valois and Owen Tudor. Catherine of Valois was a French princess born into a kingdom ravaged by war and ruled by a mentally unstable father, King Charles VI. Her life was destined to be a political tool. Born in 1401, she was one of many children of Charles VI and Isabeau of Bavaria, a mother whose own reputation was far from pristine. The ongoing 100 Years' War between England and France defined Catherine's youth. England's dynamic young king, Henry V, revived English claims to the French throne and launched devastatingly successful military campaigns, culminating in the famous victory at Agincourt in 1415. Henry V saw marriage to Catherine as a key part of his strategy to secure not just peace, but the French crown itself. After years of negotiation and further English military pressure, the Treaty of Troyes was signed in 1420. This treaty was a humiliation for France. It disinherited the Dauphin Charles, Catherine's brother, later Charles VII, and named Henry V as Regent of France and heir to the French throne upon Charles VI's death. A central component of the treaty was the marriage of Catherine of Valois to Henry V. Catherine and Henry were married on June 2, 1420, at Troyes Cathedral. She was 19, he was 33. Theirs was entirely a political union designed to seal an English triumph and unite the crowns of England and France. Contemporary accounts suggest Henry was pleased with his bride, and Catherine, by all appearances, fulfilled her duties as queen. She accompanied Henry to England and was crowned Queen of England in Westminster Abbey in February 1421. Later that year, on December 6, 1421, she gave birth to a son, Henry, the future king, Henry VI. This birth was hugely significant, as the baby was now heir to both England and, through the Treaty of Troyes, France. However, Catherine's life took a dramatic and unexpected turn. Just months after the birth of their son, Henry V died suddenly of dysentery while on campaign in France in August 1422, at the age of 35. Charles VI of France died only a few weeks later. Suddenly, Catherine was a young widow, not yet 21, and her infant son, less than a year old, was King Henry VI of England, and in the eyes of the English and their Burgundian allies, King of France. As the Dowager Queen and mother of the young king, Catherine initially maintained a position of dignity and some influence, though the actual governance of England fell to a regency council dominated by the king's uncles Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, and John, Duke of Bedford. There were concerns among the English nobility about who Catherine might remarry. A powerful stepfather to the young king could be a destabilizing influence. Parliament even passed legislation in 1427 to 1428, though its exact wording and intent are debated by historians, which appeared to restrict the ability of a dowager queen to remarry without the king's, or rather his councils, including forfeiture of lands and possessions for any man who married her without such approval. This legislation may have been prompted by rumors that Catherine was considering a marriage to Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset. It is in this atmosphere of scrutiny and restriction that Catherine embarked on a relationship that was both deeply personal and politically explosive. Sometime in the late 1420s or early 1430s, Catherine began a secret love affair with a Welshman named Owen ap Merdud ap Tudor, anglicized as Owen Tudor. Owen Tudor was a man of relatively humble origins. His family had some standing in Wales and had supported the rebellion of Owain Glyndwr, but he was by no means a great nobleman. He had come to court possibly as a soldier or a servant in the royal household, perhaps even in Catherine's own household. He was described as handsome and charming. For the Dowager Queen of England and former Queen of France to take a commoner, and the Welshman at that, the Welsh being viewed with some suspicion by the English establishment, as a lover was scandalous enough. To marry him was unthinkable. Yet, marry him she did. The exact date and circumstances of their secret marriage are unknown, as no contemporary record of it survives. It must have taken place around 1429 or 1430. as they began to have children. The marriage was kept a closely guarded secret for years. It flagrantly violated the spirit, if not the letter, of the parliamentary restrictions on her remarriage. If discovered, Owen Tudor faced ruin and Catherine immense disgrace. Despite the secrecy, they had at least 6 children together. 3 sons, Edmund, Jasper, and Owen, survived to adulthood. Another son, Edward, and a daughter, Margaret, died young. Catherine effectively retired from public life, living quietly, possibly to better conceal her marriage and growing family. The secret could not be kept forever. Catherine fell ill in 1436, and perhaps fearing exposure or seeking spiritual solace, entered Bermondsey Abbey. It was around this time, or shortly after her death on January 3, 1437, at the age of 35, that her secret marriage to Owen Tudor became public knowledge. The reaction was one of shock and outrage among the English governing elite. Owen Tudor was arrested and imprisoned, though he later escaped and was pardoned. The primary concern was the status of their children and the potential threat they might pose as half-siblings of King Henry VI if they were to make claims or be used by ambitious factions. Catherine's controversial marriage to Owen Tudor, a romance that defied convention and law, had profound and unforeseen consequences. Their eldest son, Edmund Tudor, was recognized by his half-brother King Henry VI, created Earl of Richmond, and married to Margaret Beaufort, a descendant of John of Gaunt, son of Edward III. Edmund and Margaret's son was Henry Tudor. After the tumultuous Wars of the Roses, which saw the downfall of Henry VI and the Lancastrian dynasty, it was this Henry Tudor, grandson of Catherine of Valois and Owen Tudor, who would defeat Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 and claim the English throne as King Henry VII, founding the Tudor dynasty. The Dowager Queen's scandalous secret love match with a Welsh squire, born out of personal affection rather than political calculation, thus played an accidental but crucial role in shaping the future of England. The controversy of her choice echoed long after her death, but its ultimate legacy was a line of monarchs who would preside over some of England's most tawdry periods. Number 4. Urraca of Leon and Castile and Alfonso I of Aragon. Urraca of Leon and Castile, born in 1081, was a rarity in medieval Europe, a woman destined to inherit a kingdom in her own right. She was the eldest surviving child of Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile, a powerful king who had significantly expanded his Christian territories at the expense of the Moorish Taifas in Iberia, most notably by conquering Toledo in 1085. Urraca's early life was shaped by the complex politics of her father's court and his many marriages and liaisons in pursuit of a legitimate male heir. After the death of her only legitimate brother Sancho at the Battle of Oaklis in 1108, Urraca was officially recognized as Alfonso VI's heir. To secure her position and ensure a strong male presence to help rule and defend the kingdom, Alfonso VI arranged Urraca's marriage. Her first husband, Raymond of Burgundy, a French nobleman who had come to Iberia to fight in the Reconquista, died in 1107. With Raymond, Urraca had a son, Alfonso Raymondez, the future Alfonso VII. Now a widow and the heir to a vast and often turbulent kingdom, Urraca's remarriage was a matter of urgent state importance. Alfonso VI, on his deathbed in 1109, orchestrated Urraca's second marriage to another powerful Iberian ruler, Alfonso I, King of Aragon and Navarre, known as the Battler for his relentless military campaigns against the Moors. This marriage, celebrated in late 1109, was intended to unite the two largest Christian power blocks in Iberia, creating a formidable force capable of driving the Almoravids, a new wave of North African Islamic invaders, out of the peninsula. On paper, it was a brilliant strategic alliance. In reality, it was an unmitigated disaster, both personally for Urraca and politically for her kingdoms. The controversy began almost immediately. Urraca was 30 when she married Alfonso the Battler, who was about 10 years her senior. She was a queen regnant, accustomed to wielding authority, and deeply connected to the Leonese Castilian nobility. Alfonso the Battler was a warrior king, renowned for his piety and military prowess, but also for his rigid, uncompromising nature and lack of diplomatic finesse. He was used to being the sole commander. The marriage agreement stipulated that Alfonso would be co-ruler with Urraca, and their offspring would inherit both kingdoms. If there were no children, the surviving spouse would inherit the other's realms. This arrangement immediately alarmed many in Castile and Leon, particularly the powerful Galician faction led by Count Pedro Frosaniado de Trapastella Diago Gelmiras, who championed the rights of Urraca's young son from her first marriage, Alfonso Raymundez, as the rightful heir to Castile and Leon. They feared Alfonso the Battler would usurp young Alfonso's inheritance. Personality clashes between Urraca and Alfonso the Battler were severe and immediate. Urraca was a politically astute woman who intended to rule, not merely be a consort. Alfonso expected his wife to be subordinate and seems to have had little respect for her authority or her person. Contemporary chronicles, though often biased, paint a picture of a deeply dysfunctional relationship. There were reports that Alfonso was physically abusive towards Urraca. The Chronica Adefansi Imperatoris states that Alfonso often struck her with his fist and with his spurs until she was black and blue, and that he publicly shamed her on many occasions. Whether these accounts are entirely accurate or exaggerated by Urraca's partisans, it is clear their marriage was filled with animosity. The Aragonese king also alienated the Castilian and Leonese nobility by appointing Aragonese and Navarrese men to important positions within Urraca's kingdoms, further fueling resentment and opposition. Urraca herself quickly turned against her husband. She accused him of cruelty and began to actively work against him. This led to a bizarre and destructive situation, open warfare between the queen and her king consort, each leading their own armies and factions within the supposedly united kingdoms. The marriage became a catalyst for widespread civil war. Several factions emerged: Urraca's supporters, Alfonso the Battler's supporters, and the Galician faction promoting her son, Alfonso Raymundez. Cities and regions took sides, and the kingdoms were torn apart by internal conflict, all while the Almoravid threat remained potent on their southern borders. Urraca even sought alliances with her enemies to counter her own husband. She was a pragmatic and sometimes ruthless political operator, forging and breaking alliances as needed to maintain her power and secure her son's inheritance. The scandalous and violent nature of their relationship, coupled with the political chaos it unleashed, made the marriage untenable. Urraca actively sought an annulment. The grounds were consanguinity. Urraca and Alfonso the Battler were related, both being great-grandchildren of Sancho III of Navarre. This fact was known at the time of the marriage, but conveniently ignored for political reasons. Now it became the convenient pretext for dissolving the disastrous union. After several years of bitter conflict and public acrimony, Pope Paschal II was persuaded to annul the marriage in 1114. The annulment, however, did not immediately end the fighting. Alfonso the Battler refused to relinquish his claims over parts of Castile and continued to campaign there for several more years. Urraca's reign remained turbulent, marked by ongoing struggles with rebellious nobles, conflicts with her half-sister Teresa, who ruled Portugal, and the complex task of promoting her son Alfonso Raimundez as her successor while still holding on to power herself. The marriage of Urraca and Alfonso I of Aragon stands as one of the most spectacularly failed royal unions of the Middle Ages. Intended to create an Iberian superpower, it instead plunged Castile and Leon into years of destructive civil war. The controversy stemmed not just from the political fallout or the eventual annulment, but from the reported brutality within the marriage itself and the unprecedented spectacle of a queen and her king consort waging war against each other. Urraca, despite the turmoil created by this marriage, managed to preserve her own rule and ensure the succession of her son, demonstrating remarkable resilience in the face of an exceptionally controversial and damaging marital alliance. Her reign highlighted the immense difficulties faced by a medieval queen regnant, especially when yoked to an equally strong-willed and unsuitable spouse. Number 3. Isabella of Angouleme and King John of England. Isabella of Angouleme was thrust onto the stage of European high politics at an astonishingly young age, becoming a queen through a marriage that was as impulsive as it was destructive for the English crown. Born around 1188, some sources suggest slightly earlier or later, her birth year is not precisely known. She was the only child and heir of Aymer Taillefer, Count of Angouleme, a strategically important territory in southwestern France, nestled between English-held Aquitaine and lands loyal to the French king. Isabella was, by all accounts, a beauty, sometimes referred to by chroniclers as the Helen of her age, a comparison that hinted at the trouble her allure would cause. In the year 1200, Isabella, likely around the age of 12, was betrothed to Hugh IX de Lusignan, Count of La Marche. The Lusignans were a powerful and ambitious noble family in Poitou, a region often in revolt against their overlord, the King of England, who was also Duke of Aquitaine. The marriage between Isabella and Hugh was intended to settle long-standing disputes between the Lusignans and the Counts of Angouleme, and to stabilize the volatile region. It was a typical feudal arrangement designed to forge alliances and secure territories. However, in that same year, King John of England arrived in Aquitaine. John, who had ascended to the English throne in 1199, was around 33 years old. He had recently had his first marriage to Isabella of Gloucester, annulled on grounds of consanguinity. They were second cousins, though also because she had failed to produce an heir. He was now seeking a new bride, preferably one who could bring political or strategic advantages. When John saw Isabella of Angouleme, he was reportedly captivated by her youth and beauty. Perhaps more importantly, he recognized the strategic value of her inheritance. Angouleme controlled vital routes and could either be a thorn in the side of English Aquitaine or a valuable asset. By marrying Isabella himself, John could absorb Angouleme directly into his control, bypassing the Lusignans and strengthening his own grip on his French possessions. In a move that stunned contemporaries and flouted all feudal proprieties, King John decided he wanted Isabella for himself. He negotiated with her father Aymer Tailfer, who, likely dazzled by the prospect of his daughter becoming Queen of England and perhaps intimidated by John's power, agreed to break Isabella's betrothal to Hugh de Lusignan. On August 24, 1200, King John married Isabella of Angouleme in Bordeaux. She was barely a teenager. He was a man in his mid-30s. The controversial nature of this marriage was multifaceted. Firstly, there was Isabella's extreme youth. While noble girls often married young, 12 was considered the minimum age for consent and consummation, and even then, such early marriages were sometimes viewed with unease. Secondly, and far more seriously, John had effectively stolen Hugh de Lusignan's bride. Betrothals were serious commitments in the medieval period, almost as binding as marriage itself, especially when publicly announced and agreed upon. To break a betrothal in such a high-handed manner was a grave insult to the jilted party and his family. The Lusignans were understandably furious. They felt robbed of Isabella's strategically vital inheritance and deeply dishonored. Hugh de Lusignan and his powerful family appealed to their own overlord for justice, King Philip II, Augustus of France. Philip Augustus was John's great rival and was always looking for opportunities to weaken English power in France. John's actions concerning Isabella provided Philip with the perfect pretext. As Duke of Aquitaine, John was a vassal of the French king for his continental lands. Philip summoned John to his court in Paris to answer the Lusignans' charges. John, arrogant and dismissive of Philip's authority over him, refused to appear. This was a critical mistake. In 1202, Philip Augustus declared John a contumacious vassal and pronounced all of John's French fiefdoms forfeit. This legal judgment gave Philip the justification he needed to launch a full-scale invasion of Normandy and other English territories in France. The dispossessed Lusignans and other disgruntled Poitevin nobles eagerly joined the French king's cause. The ensuing war was a disaster for John. His continental barons, many of whom were already discontented with his rule and heavy taxation, offered weak resistance or defected to Philip. John's own military efforts were often inept or ill-timed. By 1204, Normandy, a possession of the English crown since the Norman conquest in 1066, was lost to the French. Anjou, Maine, and parts of Poitou soon followed. The theft of Isabella of Angouleme, while not the sole cause, was a major catalyst for this catastrophic loss of the ancestral Angevin Empire. The controversy surrounding his marriage directly fueled the rebellion and war that cost him so much. Isabella, meanwhile, was Queen of England. Her marriage to John produced 5 children who survived to adulthood, including his heir, Henry III, and Richard, Earl of Cornwall, later King of the Romans. However, her relationship with John was reportedly not a happy one. There were rumors of her infidelity and John's cruelty. He is said to have kept her under close watch, almost a prisoner, at times. When John died in 1216 in the midst of a baronial rebellion in England, the First Barons' War which led to Magna Carta, Isabella was still only in her late 20s. Her story took another controversial turn after John's death. In 1220, Isabella returned to Angouleme, which she now ruled as countess in her own right. And there she did something quite extraordinary. She married Hugh X de Lusignan, the son of the man she had been betrothed to 20 years earlier, and whom John had so spectacularly jilted. This marriage to Hugh X, who was also Count of La Marche, was controversial in its own way. For a dowager queen of England to marry a French count of lesser status, without the consent of the English council, which was governing for her young son Henry III, was frowned upon. She also retained her English dower lands and income, which some in England felt she should forfeit. Isabella and Hugh X had 9 children together. Her actions, particularly her constant demands for more money and status from her son Henry III, and her incitement of Hugh X and other Poitevin nobles into rebellion against the French crown, and sometimes against Henry III when he failed to support them adequately, continued to stir political trouble for decades. Her marriage to John, born of his impulsive desire and disregard for feudal norms, had set off a chain reaction of war and territorial loss. Her extreme youth at the time made her a pawn, but the consequences of that royal union were devastating for the Angevin Empire and reshaped the political map of Western Europe. Number 2. Joanna, the First of Naples and Andrew of Hungary. Joanna I of Naples was one of the most fascinating and controversial female rulers of the 14th century. Born in 1326 or 1327, she was the granddaughter of the reigning King of Naples, Robert the Wise of the Capetian House of Anjou. Naples was a wealthy and culturally vibrant kingdom in southern Italy. Joanna was designated as heir to the throne by her grandfather because his own son, Charles of Calabria, Joanna's father, had predeceased him. This made Joanna a highly desirable marriage prospect. King Robert, in a bid to settle dynastic rivalries and unite the 2 branches of the Angevin family, arranged for Joanna to marry Andrew of Hungary. Andrew was her cousin, the son of King Charles I of Hungary, who was himself a nephew of King Robert. Both Joanna and Andrew were great-grandchildren of Charles II of Naples. The Hungarian Angevins believed they had a stronger claim to the Neapolitan throne, and this marriage was intended to heal old wounds and secure the succession. Joanna and Andrew were mere children when they were betrothed, and they were married in 1333 or 1334, when Joanna was about 7 and Andrew about 6. They grew up together in the Neapolitan court, a place renowned for its luxury, learning, and intrigue. The problems began almost as soon as King Robert died in January 1343. Joanna, then about 16 or 17, became Queen of Naples. In his will, King Robert had stipulated that Joanna was to be queen regnant, but that Andrew was only to be styled Duke of Calabria, and was not to be crowned king or share in her sovereign authority until he reached the age of 25, and only then with papal approval. This immediately created tension. Andrew, backed by his ambitious Hungarian mother, Queen Elizabeth of Poland, and a faction of Hungarian courtiers and friars who had accompanied him to Naples, expected to be crowned king and rule alongside Joanna, if not over her. He was described as rough, uncultured, and possibly cruel, a stark contrast to the sophisticated Neapolitan court and the intelligent, vivacious Joanna. Joanna and the Neapolitan nobility were resistant to Andrew's ambitions. They feared Hungarian domination. Joanna herself, who had been raised as the heir and clearly intended to rule, found herself in a power struggle with her own husband. Andrew reportedly threatened Joanna and complained to the Pope in Avignon, Clement VI, seeking to be crowned. Pope Clement VI was the feudal overlord of Naples and had significant influence. After much political maneuvering and a hefty payment from the Hungarians, The Pope eventually agreed that Andrew should be crowned king. This decision alarmed the Neapolitan nobles, who supported Joanna's sole sovereignty and feared for their own positions and influence under a Hungarian-backed king. The situation became increasingly volatile. Andrew was deeply unpopular with many powerful figures at court, including members of Joanna's own extended family, like the Taranto and Durazzo branches of the Angevins, who also had their own ambitions for power. Then, on the night of September 18 to 19, 1345, the unthinkable happened. The royal couple was staying at a hunting lodge in Avarsa, near Naples. Andrew, then about 17, was lured from his bedchamber by a group of conspirators on the pretext of urgent news. In the hallway, he was attacked, brutally murdered, strangled, possibly with a golden cord, and his body thrown from a window into the garden below. Joanna was in her own bedchamber at the time. Her role in the murder has been debated by historians for centuries. The assassination of a royal prince, Joanna's husband, caused an immediate and massive scandal throughout Europe. Suspicion naturally fell upon Joanna and her close circle of courtiers and relatives, many of whom clearly benefited from Andrew's demise. Was she a complicit wife, an innocent victim, or a mastermind behind the plot? Contemporary chroniclers, often influenced by political biases, offered conflicting accounts. Some portrayed her as a cold-blooded killer, while others depicted her as a grieving widow, unaware of the conspiracy. Joanna herself claimed innocence, but her actions in the aftermath did little to dispel suspicion. She was slow to investigate the murder and bring the culprits to justice, which many interpreted as a sign of guilt. Andrew's older brother, Louis I, King of Hungary, was enraged by the murder and Joanna's perceived inaction. He accused her directly of orchestrating the assassination and vowed revenge. He prepared to invade Naples to punish Joanna and claim the Neapolitan throne for himself, asserting the rights of the Hungarian Angevins, adding fuel to the fire of controversy. Just under a year after Andrew's murder, in August 1346, Queen Joanna married again. Her new husband was Louis of Taranto, her cousin, and one of the powerful Neapolitan nobles who had been rumored to be involved in Andrew's murder. Louis of Taranto was also widely believed to have been Joanna's lover before Andrew's death. This swift remarriage to a man suspected of involvement in her first husband's killing was seen by many as further evidence of Joanna's guilt. It looked like she had simply removed an inconvenient husband to marry the man she truly wanted, and who would be more compliant as a prince consort. The murder of Andrew and Joanna's subsequent marriage to Louis of Taranto plunged Naples into chaos. King Louis I of Hungary invaded Naples in 1347, forcing Joanna and her new husband to flee to Avignon to seek the Pope's protection. In Avignon, Joanna faced a formal trial before Pope Clement VI for her alleged role in Andrew's murder. In a politically astute move, she sold the city of Avignon to the Pope. It remained a papal territory for centuries, and, after a trial where she eloquently defended herself, she was acquitted in 1348. The Pope declared her innocent, citing her youth and the influence of her allegedly corrupt courtiers, though the verdict was likely influenced by political considerations as much as by evidence. Joanna and Louis of Taranto were eventually able to return to Naples after the Hungarian forces, weakened by the Black Death and logistical problems, withdrew. However, her reign remained plagued by warfare, internal rebellions, and the enduring taint of scandal from her first marriage, and Andrew's horrific death. The controversy surrounding that marriage, the power struggle, the brutal assassination, the accusations against the queen and her quick remarriage, defined Joanna's early rule and cast a long, dark shadow over her entire tumultuous reign. She would go on to marry 2 more times, but the saga of her marriage to Andrew of Hungary remained the most notorious and damaging episode of her life. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England. Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the most formidable and fascinating women of the High Middle Ages. Born around 1122 or 1124, she inherited the vast duchy of Aquitaine in southwestern France upon the death of her father, William X, in 1137. Aquitaine was larger and wealthier than the personal domain of the King of France himself, making Eleanor the most eligible heiress in Europe. Her father, on his deathbed, entrusted her to the guardianship of King Louis VI of France, with the understanding that she would marry Louis's son and heir, also named Louis. Within weeks of her father's death, Eleanor, barely a teenager, was married to the Dauphin Louis, the future Louis VII, in July 1137. Shortly thereafter, Louis VI died, and Eleanor, at about 15, became Queen of France. Her marriage to Louis VII lasted for 15 years, and was by most accounts not a happy one. Eleanor was high-spirited, intelligent, and accustomed to the vibrant, cultured court of Aquitaine, known for its troubadours and more liberal social mores. Louis VII, by contrast, was pious, reserved, and some said monastic in his temperament. He reportedly loved Eleanor deeply, but was often bewildered and overwhelmed by her. The first major point of controversy in Eleanor's marital career arose from this union. They had 2 daughters, Marie and Alix, but failed to produce a male heir, a critical issue for the French monarchy. Tensions were exacerbated during the Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, which Eleanor insisted on accompanying, along with her own Aquitanian vassals. Her conduct on crusade was scandalous to some. There were rumors of an overly close relationship with her uncle Raymond of Poitiers, the Prince of Antioch. She also openly disagreed with Louis's military strategies. By the time they returned to France, the marriage was irretrievably broken. In March 1152, their marriage was annulled by a council of French bishops at Beaugency on the grounds of consanguinity. They were third cousins once removed. The real reasons were more likely their incompatibility, Eleanor's failure to provide a son, and mutual desire to end the union. Eleanor regained control of Aquitaine. Now a free woman, and still Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, Eleanor was once again the most sought-after bride in Europe. She was around 30 years old, experienced, and controlled a vast territory. Several powerful nobles attempted to abduct and forcibly marry her as she made her way back to Poitiers from Beaugency. She evaded them, but she clearly needed the protection of a strong husband, and quickly. Her choice of a second husband was stunning and ignited immediate controversy. Just 8 weeks after her annulment from Louis VII, on May 18, 1152, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Count of Anjou and Duke of Normandy. Henry was nearly 11 years younger than Eleanor. She was about 30. He was only 19. This age difference, with the woman being significantly older, was highly unusual for the time and raised eyebrows. The speed of the marriage was scandalous in itself. To remarry so quickly after an annulment, especially to a major political rival of her former husband, was a bold and provocative act. Furthermore, Henry Plantagenet and Eleanor were also related by blood even more closely than Eleanor and Louis VII had been. They were third cousins. A papal dispensation would have been required for this marriage too, but it's unclear if one was sought or obtained before the wedding. The haste suggests they may have bypassed formalities. The political implications of this marriage were seismic. Henry Plantagenet was already a powerful figure, controlling Anjou, Maine, and Normandy. By marrying Eleanor, he now gained control of Aquitaine. This combined territory, stretching from the English Channel to the Pyrenees, created a massive Angevin empire that dwarfed the lands directly controlled by Eleanor's ex-husband, King Louis VII of France. Louis was predictably furious. He had lost a wife and, more importantly, had allowed the vast and wealthy Aquitaine to fall into the hands of his most dangerous vassal and rival. This marriage dramatically shifted the balance of power in Western Europe and laid the groundwork for centuries of conflict between the English and French crowns. Despite the controversial beginnings and the age gap, the early years of Eleanor and Henry's marriage seemed successful, at least in dynastic terms. In 1154, just 2 years after their wedding, Henry became King Henry II of England, making Eleanor Queen of England. Together, they had 8 children, 5 sons: William, who died young, Henry, the young king, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, and 3 daughters, Matilda, Eleanor, and Joan. Many of these children would play significant roles in European history. However, the strong wills and ambitions that had drawn Eleanor and Henry together eventually drove them apart. Henry was a dynamic, energetic, and often ruthless ruler, constantly on the move, consolidating his vast territories. He was also notoriously unfaithful, his most famous mistress being Rosamund Clifford. Eleanor was not a woman to be easily sidelined. She was politically astute, deeply involved in the governance of Aquitaine, and sought to maintain her own power and influence. As their sons grew older, tensions within the family escalated. Eleanor actively encouraged her sons' ambitions and grievances against their father. In 1173, she supported Henry the Young, King Richard, her favorite, and Geoffrey in a major rebellion against Henry II. When the revolt failed in 1174, Henry II retaliated by imprisoning Eleanor. She remained his captive, sometimes under house arrest, sometimes in stricter confinement, for the next 16 years until Henry's death in 1189. The Queen, who had defied a French king and astounded Europe with her swift and strategic remarriage, spent a significant portion of that marriage as a political prisoner of her own husband. Upon Henry II's death, their son Richard I, the Lionheart, became king and immediately released his mother. Eleanor, then in her late 60s, resumed an active political role, governing England as regent, while Richard was on the Third Crusade and later when he was imprisoned in Germany. She worked tirelessly to secure his ransom and protect his interests. She outlived Richard and saw her youngest and least loved son, John, become king in 1199. Eleanor died in 1204, in her early 80s, a remarkable age for the period, at the Fraught Abbey, where she was buried alongside Henry II and Richard. Eleanor of Aquitaine's marriage to Henry II was born in controversy. The scandalous speed, the significant age difference, the questionable legality concerning consanguinity, and the immense political upheaval it caused. It created an empire, but also sowed the seeds of its destruction through the bitter family feuds it engendered. Her life was a testament to her extraordinary will and political acumen, navigating and often instigating the turbulent currents of medieval power politics through her marriages and her children. The controversy of her second marriage defined not only her life, but the political landscape of England and France for generations to come.